So imagine you're the CEO of a massive company. I mean, offices in 100 different cities. How do you even begin to keep it all from falling into total chaos? You can't be everywhere at once, right? Well, today we're going to dive into the clever way huge organizations maintain control, and it's by strategically letting some of it go. I mean, think about it. It's a huge challenge. How does that person at the very top get a clear, honest picture of what's working in, say, Tokyo versus what's failing in Toronto? It seems almost impossible, but the solution is actually pretty elegant. And that solution, that big idea, is decentralization. Instead of trying to make every single decision from a central headquarters, smart companies empower their local managers. It's all about letting go of some control so you can actually achieve more growth. Okay, so you've basically got two ways to run the show. On one side, you have the classic top-down approach of a centralized company, where all the big calls are made at the very top. But on the other side, in a decentralized model, the decisions get pushed down to the people who are actually on the ground. It just makes sense, doesn't it? The manager in Tokyo probably knows the local market way, way better than an executive sitting in New York, and that means you get faster, smarter decisions. Now, to make this whole thing work, you have to break the company into smaller, more manageable units. These are called responsibility centers, and you can think of them like Lego bricks that build the entire organization. Each brick has a very specific purpose and a manager who's accountable for how well it's doing. And there are four main types of these bricks. At the simplest level, you've got a cost center. Think of something like a janitorial department. The manager's only job? Control costs. That's it. Next up, a revenue center, like a sales team. Their one and only goal is to bring in money. Things get a little more complicated with a profit center, say the appliance department in a store. Now the manager has to worry about both revenues and expenses. And then, at the top of the pyramid, you have the investment center. This is like a whole branch office. That manager is on the hook for everything: revenues, expenses, and the capital that's invested in their unit, the whole shebang. So let me ask you, just looking at those four types, which one is basically its own mini company? It's got to be the investment center, right? Of course, that manager is pretty much the CEO of their own little division, making calls on everything from day-to-day profits to long-term investments. But, breaking the company into these centers is really just the first step. The next part, and maybe the most critical part, is figuring out a fair way to judge how they're all performing. Because if your measurement system's broken, the entire structure is going to collapse. You've got to have clear, fair rules of the game. And the first, most important rule is the controllability principle. And really, it's just pure common sense. You can't blame the manager of a branch in sunny California for low sales of snow shovels. It's just fundamentally unfair to hold someone accountable for something they have zero control over. This simple principle is what makes any performance review actually meaningful. The second rule, goal congruence, is just as crucial. It means making sure that when a manager does what's best for their own department, they are also doing what's best for the whole company. Without this, you get something called sub-optimization. For example, a purchasing department might crush their cost-cutting goals by buying cheaper materials, but that could totally sabotage the manufacturing department by causing more defects. That's a classic case of one team's win being the entire company's loss. And this brings us to what is honestly the trickiest part of this whole system. What in the world do you do with costs that don't neatly belong to any single department? I'm talking about who foots the bill for the CEO's salary, or the corporate marketing team, or that big IT department that serves literally everyone. These are called common costs. They're all those shared services or facilities. And the big problem here is that there's no direct cause and effect link. I mean, the appliance department didn't directly cause the cost of the corporate legal team. So how on earth do you decide how much of that legal team's budget they should have to pay for? It can feel completely arbitrary. So why even bother trying to allocate these costs at all? Well, there are actually some pretty good reasons. First, it's a constant reminder to managers that central services like HR or IT are not free. It forces them to make sure their profits are big enough to cover a fair share of those headquarters costs. And this can actually encourage them to use those shared services wisely and even put pressure on HQ to keep its own costs in check. But, and this is a big but, there is a major downside. If the way you split the bills seems unfair, it can absolutely crush morale. It can start fights between managers, and even worse, if you allocate costs based on an ability to bear model, which means the most profitable division pays the biggest share, you're basically penalizing your most successful managers. And that is a recipe for serious demotivation. So this leaves managers in a really tough spot. They have to allocate these costs somehow, but how can they do it fairly without totally tanking morale? Well, this challenge has led to two main approaches people use to try and solve this puzzle.
The two most common methods you're going to see are the standalone method and the incremental method. Now, they sound a little technical, I know, but the logic behind them is actually pretty straightforward once you see it.
All right, let's make this real with an example. Imagine there's a shared cost of $8,000. The first approach is the standalone method. This one's pretty simple. You just look at the proportion of service each customer used, say 70%, 20%, and 10%, and you just split that $8,000 bill along those exact same lines. It's a simple, proportional split, easy. The incremental method, though, is a totally different animal. First, you rank the users. The biggest user, Luciano, is considered the primary one. They're on the hook for the first $7,000 of that shared cost. That leaves just $1,000 left over. So the next user in line, Ratzinger, pays that remaining $1,000. And in this case, the smallest user, well, they pay nothing at all. See? A very different way to slice the pie. And that brings us to the final, crucial question. If you were the manager, which method would you choose? Is it fairer to split the bill proportionally so everyone pays something, or to make the biggest user shoulder most of the burden? There's no single right answer, and that very dilemma is right at the heart of what it means to manage any large, complex organization.